Hello students, welcome to the Analyst dated 6th of October 2023. Today we look at 5 important articles from the Indian Express and the Hindu. The first article is regarding the recent cascading disaster that has happened in Sikkim. Then we'll take up the case study of NCR pollution. Then we'll look at the terror ecosystem and what it entails. Then we'll look at Spain wildfire, and finally we'll look at India Inc., which says that climate change is the single biggest risk that it faces. Now let's start with the first article, and this pertains to your GS1 geography, GS3 environment and ecology, as well as disaster management. Now before we go ahead, let's look at the context. So more than 14 people have lost their life and more than 100 are missing, and tourists are stranded in areas of Chungthang, Lachung, Laching, which are famous tourist destinations. In this backdrop, let's understand what is a cascading disaster. So let's take this example, this figure as an example, and let's say there is a simple event A, and this event A, let's say, can lead to two other events, event B and event C. But over the period of time, these individual events can lead to multiple other events. So over the period of time, what will happen? A single hazard will have multiple vulnerabilities, and each of these vulnerabilities might create newer hazards. So over the period of time, what will happen? That a single event may be amplified, and simultaneously there can be a chain of events, and this amplification and this chain of events can be extremely dangerous. Let's say there is a cloud burst. Individually, cloud burst is a localized phenomena. It is extremely localized. But if this cloud burst triggers, let's say, a flash flood and let's say a dam collapse, then what happens? This has just become a cascading disaster, and it has amplified in terms of its magnitude and its impact on people, on lives, livelihood, as well as on the biodiversity. Now let's look at what happened in Sikkim. So we will take this up in a cascading manner, how it all triggered. So firstly, heavy rains started, and some part of the region received extra heavy rains because of cloudburst. Now let's appreciate, whenever we are talking about heavy rains, we are talking about on a regional scale. Let's say the northern Himalayas, or let's say the Sikkim region, or let's say the regions of Bhutan, Sikkim, etc. they received heavy rainfall. But cloudburst will be more localized, and therefore the impact will also be localized, unless and until it starts triggering a chain of hazards. Now heavy rains, some part of it, cloudburst. This cloudburst led to glacial lake outburst flood. Now what happens is that in the mountains there are many glacial lakes, and these glacial lakes will be bounded by moraines. Now let's say due to some event this moraine wall is affected, let's say a crack develops, then what will happen? There will be a breach, and once there is a breach, the water will gush out of it. Now let's say that this is the time of winters, then this glacier will completely be frozen, right? But let's say now it's the time of summer, so what will happen? Now parts of it is completely water. Simultaneously, if I add, let's say, a lot of rain, I add cloud burst also, then what happens? The pressure on the walls, that is the moraines, will increase. Let's say simultaneously I trigger an earthquake, or I trigger some amount of tremors locally, regionally, or in the Himalayan ecology in all. Then what can happen? This can trigger the breaking up of this moraine wall. So any local regional event like the moraine dam geometry, the earthquakes, the avalanches, extreme rainfall, cloudburst, any such hazard can then trigger a glacial lake outburst flood. Also, we must appreciate that the Himalayas are a series of mountains, And as we go high in terms of altitude, all the lakes eventually will be frozen lakes. So if we are talking about regions with 5,000 meters of average height, that is the North Sikkim region, then naturally we will have a lot of glacial lakes. Then this led to excessive flow in various rivers, and naturally water had to be released from the Chungthang dam, which led to flash floods downstream in Sikkim. We are still in Sikkim. Then what happened? It led to closure of two NHPC plants, and these are hydroelectric plants, so that there is no failure of these plants like happened in Uttarakhand and Himachal. So closure of, as a part of precautionary principle, we close down the power plants. Then what happens? This flood reaches North Bengal. Why? Because this is the orientation of, let's say, Sikkim. This is the orientation of Himalayas. And this is the orientation of a river called Tista. That means under any circumstances, if there is excessive flow in Sikkim, it will naturally affect the northern Bengal region, as well as it will affect the northern Bangladesh region. Why? Because Tista is also the lifeline for Bangladesh, because Bangladesh depends upon its water for drinking purposes. Now let's look at some of the maps which can become prelim pointers. So this is the Tista river, and this is somewhere that we have the Chungthang dam, and we have multiple tributaries called the Lachen, Lachung, Rangjit or Ranjit. Then we have Chungthang. These are the tributaries to the river Tista, and this Tista will finally join Brahmaputra and will flow into Bangladesh. Now let's look at the maps and try to understand this cascading disaster further. So we must appreciate that the Himalayas are in this orientation, and if I draw them in this map, then the Himalayas is in this orientation. That simply means that the Himalayas are wider in the northwestern region and it is narrower in the northeastern region. But if we look at the slope of, let's say, the Great Himalayas, naturally they are of same average height. So what would happen, that if I draw the cross section of the northwest Himalayas, so I will have bigger gaps, and these gaps are nothing but the plains. So plains interspersed between various ranges of Himalayas. But if I draw the same diagram for northeast, what will happen? It will be more constricted. There will be less space in between multiple ranges, and that is why it is extremely, if I can say, that the drop of slope is extremely steep. On the other hand, here the drop of slope is very gradual. Only if we compare both the cases. Any which way, if we take it on a standalone basis, the steepness is extreme, because we are coming from 6,000 and 8,000 meters. Now, with this steepness, we are coming, so very high speed of river. Then the profile of river Tista is extremely straight. Why? Because it has no time to meander. Why? Because the slope is extremely steep and the flow is completely clean, and this has very high hydroelectric potential. Then there is also the issue of river water sharing between India and Bangladesh. Why? Because it is clean drinking water. So what will happen? If I look at the profile of the river, can I say that majority of the tributaries are joining in this manner, and this river is flowing almost vertically from north to south? So if there is any problem, let's say here, or let's say there is a problem here, naturally this problem will be dragged into the mainstream, and that is what has happened. That, let's say this was Tista and there is a problem in one of the tributaries, some localized problems here, and this cascading hazard has finally, with the stream, flown down to even parts of North Bengal. So not only South Sikkim but also North Bengal, that is districts of Kalimpong, Darjeeling, etc. Now let's understand what are the reasons. So a Tista basin has numerous high altitude glacial lakes. Sikkim alone has 733 glacial lakes, out of which more than 250 are at the altitude of 5000 meters. That means there is extreme amount of freeze and thaw, and if the wall which is protecting the lake, if this wall it breaks down because of any of other hazards, then naturally there can be a glacial lake outburst flood. Then this lake called South Lonak Lake, this lake was also the largest and the fastest growing. Now back in 2021, it was pointed out that anytime there can be a glacial lake outburst flood from the South Lonak Lake. Why? Because its size was increasing, which was visible in the spatial maps taken from space. Then another issue is, did the hazard get triggered from rain and then let's say cloud burst, or was it because of the earthquake that the glacial wall, the moraine wall was broken or was weakened, and then cloud burst finally led to the final impact or the final blow? So that is yet to be seen. But in majority of the cases, for example, NDMA and ISRO, they all are saying that the event is because of heavy rain, then triggering cloud burst, then triggering flash floods. But it is yet to be seen whether this event can be directly triggered from the Nepal earthquake. Now, in this regard, we can have a food for thought. Our concluding remarks, as this is a Himalayan region, and this Himalayan region is extremely fragile. And if we are living in the extremely fragile Himalayan region, then we must appreciate the principles of carrying capacity of that region, and we must also appreciate the environmental concept of precautionary principle before we go for any anthropogenic intervention in the Himalayan ecosystem at all. Let's look at the second article, and this pertains to GS1 Geography, GS3 Environment Ecology, and GS3 Disaster Management. And we are talking about the NCR pollution. Now, why is it in the news? Because very soon winters are coming, and Delhi NCR sees extreme amount of winter pollution, toxic winter pollution. And so the government plans to counter the upcoming winter pollution in Delhi NCR. Now, before we go ahead, we must look at the local topography of Delhi NCR. So if we look to the north of NCR, what do we see? We see a barrier of Himalayas. If we look towards Rajasthan, what do we see? We see that a very large, very old and large chain of old fold mountain is narrowing towards the Delhi ridges. Then down south, what do I see? I see that there are multiple plateaus. For example, Bundelkhand, Baghelkhand. That leaves me with a very little narrow area, that is this region. This is precisely my northern plains. Now in these northern plains, I am located at the foothill of Aravalli. And precisely the Delhi NCR, if I would like to draw it, is nothing but Delhi at the center and cities like Noida, Faridabad, Gurugram, Ghaziabad at the periphery. So this is the core, and we have peripheral cities all around Delhi. That is the National Capital Region. Now, why geography becomes extremely important? Because let's say we are during the rainy season. So what happens during the rainy season? That a lot of winds, moisture laden winds, they will come, but these winds are not intercepted by the Aravalli. Why? Because they are parallel. So these winds will go scot-free. Now what do you think? If they are not able to get intercepted by Aravalli, will they be intercepted in Delhi? And Delhi lacks mountains except the Delhi Ridge, which is itself a part of the Aravalli. So it is again not intercepted. But can I say that whenever wind flows, so it will carry a lot of dust, and as wind moves ahead, it loses its energy, and so the wind will gradually carry the sand, the gravel, the particulate matter, and it can deposit in any area, just like Delhi. And eventually, why it will deposit? Because it is moving towards the Himalayas, and the wind cannot carry this dust particle to the heights of Himalayas, and these winds will gradually rise all across the Himalayas to produce orographic rainfall on the southern slopes of Himalayas. It will not produce rain here. It will produce the rain in the Himalayas, which will in turn recharge the Himalayan rivers also. Right? So this area is not getting any rain or very little rain, 25 centimeters of rain. And simultaneously what we have seen? We have seen that all nearby regions are at a height. That means somewhere down the line, if I can say that Delhi is in a cup, it is sitting in a cup. On one side we have the Himalayas, on the other we have the Peninsular Plateau, on this side we have the Aravalli. So on three sides you are not able to intercept. Also, can we say that the location itself is continental? That is, it is completely isolated from marine influence. And if there is no marine influence, then there is no land or sea breeze. There is no moderating effect. There is no mixing of air. So nothing is there. So you are trapped. Now let's say you heat a land. There is too much of heat in Delhi. Okay, you heat a land, so low pressure is created. This low pressure, what will happen? All the winds will come towards this low pressure, and it will rise. It will rise to create clouds. Now fine, the clouds are created. These clouds can lead to precipitation. But what if I tell you that I will not even lead to cloud formation? Why? Because suddenly what I'll do is, I will go for temperature inversion. So let's say, what happens if we go layer by layer in the air? So the temperature tends to decrease as we go up in altitude. What happens? The temperature decreases. If this doesn't happen, let's say the temperature increases in one particular layer. Let's say the temperature is increasing. Then it is called as temperature inversion layer. And let's say this is the temperature inversion layer. Right? Now what was happening? There was low pressure. From this low pressure winds were coming. Very good. Then they wanted to rise. Very good. Adiabatic rise. They wanted to cool down, condense, create clouds. But what happens? There is a temperature inversion layer. So what will happen? It will not be able to rise and it will again sink back. So can I say, if there is a lot of dust particles, okay, let's again draw something, and let's say that in one condition I had winds in Delhi. Very good. They tried to rise, but there was a temperature inversion layer. So it couldn't rise and it had to sink back. This is one condition. In the other condition, what is happening? That there is no wind at all. There is no wind at all. Why? Because let's say it is winter. So I have a high pressure. So high pressure wind is going away, but it is not able to escape. Why? Because the topography doesn't allow. Because the nearby topography doesn't allow this air to escape. So what will happen? Circulation of the same old toxic mix. And therefore, whenever there is high pressure on Delhi, wherever there is high pressure on Delhi, can I say that the heat as well as the dust will be trapped? And due to this trap, what will happen? We will have again more pollution. So if you keep adding more and more pollutant to Delhi, Delhi has no mechanism to clean it on itself. So it can only depend on, let's say, precipitation. But what did we see? Because why? Because we have too much particulate matter. Let's say there is too much of rain. So what will happen? The particulate matter will sink down. And that is why we feel very fresh after precipitation. After there is some rainfall, there is a lot of relief. Now what will happen? In this case, we do not have precipitation more than 25 centimeter. That too during the southwest monsoon. That too because of interception of Delhi ridge, which is very rare. So Delhi will always have to carry on with its pollutants. Now the other factor, this is the geographical factor. What else? What creates this effect? What adds to the pollution? So the airshed effect of the complete NCR region. Now air is not bifurcated by state boundary. I cannot divide air. I cannot divide, this is the air of Haryana, this is the air of Uttar Pradesh, this is the air of Punjab. This cannot happen. So there is no boundary that geography knows. And if there is no boundary, then it will be just like watershed. It will flow wherever it wants, except for the restrictions that we have created, or if there are natural restrictions of, let's say, pressure, or if there is some orography, there is some topographical change. So airshed, that means whatever happens in Haryana is naturally connected to Delhi. Whatever happens in Lucknow is also naturally connected. Why? Because this is a single system of air supply. Then there is extreme amount of low wind speed in winters. In winters, what do we see? We see a high pressure system developing in the northern plains. In summers, what do we have? Low pressure. So in low pressure condition in Delhi, the pollution is still milder, except for the days when there is temperature inversion in a particular region. But in winters, what happens? High pressure. So no wind movement. Wind is not able to escape. So dust, particles, anything that we add remains there. So naturally, we must be adding something. And how we are adding that? So stubble burning, and this is again a regional phenomena. This is not a local phenomena. So in the entire region, we are going for stubble burning to save time so that we can harvest the present crop, then burn the crop, then go for the next crop as soon as possible, go for sowing as soon as possible so that it doesn't affect my livelihood. Then vehicular pollution, we know diesel guzzling cars, we know that diesel based trucks will be must. So all night these trucks will enter Delhi for our veggies, fruits and any supplies. All night they will travel and they might reach to the Azadpur Mandi, right? So vehicular pollution is there. Now overnight we cannot convert all the trucks to electric vehicles, right? So the supply chain which has been created for decades, that will remain to add more and more pollution. A solution to this has come in the form of ring. That means only those vehicles which wants to enter Delhi should enter the Delhi roads. Rest can go through the Eastern Peripheral Expressway and the Western Peripheral Expressway. This was created all around Delhi. Let's say this is Delhi. So a ring of network expressway has been created so that unnecessary trucks do not enter or Delhi does not become a transshipment hub. Rather, it is bypassed. Then firecrackers are there. There are firecrackers. Then construction activities, demolition activities, waste burning, dumping of waste. What do we see? We see that in mornings of winters, people will start burning the waste for their heating purposes. Also, we see that there is continuous demolition and construction activity being taken up without the necessary protocols, for example, covering the areas of construction. And so these all pollutant sources will add multiple types of pollutants, whether it is volatile organic compounds, whether it is NOx, whether it is SOx, whether it is carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide. So all these pollutants will be added. On top of it, the most dangerous is PM, particulate matter, which in the form of PM1, PM 2.5, PM10 will be added. And so what locally we are doing about it? So we'll see a lot of trucks will be moving of the NDMC of the municipality. It will be moving all around the roads, spraying some mist so that this dust on the roads, it settles down. The dust around construction places settles down. Then do we have the problem of dumping of waste, open landfills. Then polluting STPs. Sewage treatment plant were created in Delhi to solve the problem of liquid waste, to go for circular economy. But what if the sewage treatment plants themselves become polluting by emitting hazardous gas in the nearby region? And that has been complained of a lot of RWAs in terms of STPs leading to a polluting environment and polluting water also, and also creating a smelly neighborhood, and also going for a lot of toxic leaching in the soil. So this is the story of STPs which are using redundant technologies. Now, let's look at the mitigation strategies. So we are going for happy seeders, then we are going for BS6 vehicles, we are moving towards electric vehicles, we are even using a good hydrogen based buses in Delhi and EV based buses also. So public transportation, whether it is Delhi Metro, whether we are going for hydrogen based buses or EVs or even for vehicles, we are only trying to look at the pollution from the vehicles. Then we have closed down the thermal power plants. Thermal power plants have been closed where we cannot go for retrofitting of pollution control mechanisms. So we have closed down NTPC Pragati. Then we have also gone for construction of expressway. Best example, EPE and WPE, Eastern and Western Peripheral Expressway. And then we have the graded action plan, GRAP. This is essentially a plan where the intensity of pollution is matched with the action. So graded response action plan. So if it is red alert, there will be different measures. If it is orange, so based upon the intensity of challenge. Then what is the way forward? So we must look for regional solution. If there is a problem at the regional level, we must look at cooperative federalism, where more and more states are involved. So all these states which are part of the airshed, even if they are not part of the NCR region, they must be taken in confidence. And this requires a lot of political will, and naturally there must be public awareness. Public awareness in terms of people raising their rights of their fundamental right to clean air, and the state moving towards a common pollution target, where the entire region of NCR and nearby region, they go for pollution targets in a graded manner. For example, let's say a 3-year plan, a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, where clear-cut targets of pollution are delineated. The third article pertains to GS3 internal security. Now, the Union Home Minister says that all the states must dismantle terror ecosystem. Then he asks state police force and anti-terror agencies to be ruthless so that no terror group can grow or be formed. That means kill it as it comes. That means there should be no terror groups. And if there is growth of terror group, that is also to be curtailed. That is the advice from the Union Home Minister to the states. Why? Because there is an anti-terror conference that is being organized by the National Investigative Agency, which is lauded for its high credibility in terms of culpability, in terms of accuracy of case building, and its deeper intelligence and investigative methods. Now let's look at the key constituents of what is terror ecosystem. So whenever we are looking at terrorism, so it is a global menace. Then it is also India's mess. India is also affected. Then almost any or all states can be affected. That means somewhere down the line, we need participative approach between state and state, between center and state. There must be participation, and between India and the globe. Now, how do I define terrorism? So, let's say I go for any fear mechanism. Say I release a video of killing. So, I am instilling fear. Fear in whom? The ordinary citizens. Even though we do not have a global definition, and that is India's argument, that we do not have a global definition. And one's good terrorist is others bad terrorist. So we should not differentiate between good and bad terrorists. So we were looking at fear. Fear in ordinary citizen. Why? So that these ordinary citizens can panic. And out of this panic, the government takes certain decisions which are not to be taken. So there is a player who wants India to take certain decisions. Let's say this player is a neighbor, right? So this neighbor wants India to take certain decisions. And let's say this player is also in partnership with a champion. So this player and champion, they together, they want India to, let's say, waste too much money on land security, while please ignore trade, please ignore economic development, please ignore, let's say, blue economy, please ignore marine security. So what I'll do, I will buy some cheap terrorist locally I'll source them, and I will try to push my agenda through fear on any of the borders. So what will India do? India will be coerced into this action. It will spend more heavily. It will import further more goods. Now, can I say some other person is also in that interest? Let's say an arms seller. So anyone who wants to sell arms wants a conflict. So they would also want that the player and champion create some kind of tension, so that India gives a big order, let's say $2 billion worth of order, which was not required right now, may be required 2 years down the line. But because of this emergent condition, 3 players are benefiting. And who is at loss? The citizen, the ordinary citizen, the government of India. So what did I do? I used fear of a killing video to coerce an action out of a state. And so it is must that not only terrorism should be finished. Why? Because it is a threat, naturally. But any forms of its ecosystem must also be dismantled. Why? Because let's say I eliminate the terrorist modules, but the ecosystem is still present. And let's say they get another sigh of breath. They get some extra funding. They can again rejuvenate in their own ecosystem. So this ecosystem must also be killed. And the problem is that today's ecosystem is also extremely dynamic. Why? Because earlier it was about human intelligence. Today it is about technology. So with the evolution of, or can I say the revolution, the sudden revolutions of technology, can I say the impact of terrorism and the ease with which terrorism can grow and spread today has also increased in the era of social media and internet. Now, what are these key constituents? So, the Hawala route, the usual culprit, the Hawala route. So, this Middle East route, let's say I am in a bazaar of Delhi and I am sending some money to, let's say, Abu Dhabi and returning some money from Abu Dhabi also. Why? Because someone earned a remittance. So, it is easier not to pay taxes and simultaneously bypass the government's scrutiny through the Hawala network, and this is a form of money laundering, right? That we have already discussed. So, we are going for Hawala route. Then, we are using terror funding modules, different methods, cryptocurrency, Hawala route. We are going for organized crime. Let's say I have 100 crores extra, and rather than taking this money out of India, I start running an organized crime so that this 100 crore can be multiplied to, let's say, 200 crores, right? So I have to first siphon off the 100 crores, then create a business, a corporate structure type of business. So organize all the crimes. Let's say I am running a fake passport racket. Now, if there is a fake passport racket, what are the chances that a terror group may use this fake passport module to get their own fake passports? It is but obvious. Let's say I am using arms. I have created an arms module. So, can the terrorists come to India and then procure their arms in India? That can happen. So, what we are implying is that each one of these individual crimes, if they have any connectivity with terrorism, they must also be handled with the hard side of the state. That means we are looking at narco-terrorism whenever we are looking at golden triangle, we are looking at golden crescent. We have to take care of all of these events. Why? Why would we find 10,000 crore worth of drugs in the ports of India? Why would there will be some, let's say, some 50 kgs worth of cocaine be dumped in the borders of India? Why would that happen? So, naturally, any kind of organized crime, if it has any linkages with terrorism, it is also now part of terrorism. Why? Because this can be seen in the government of India's approach. The change in terms of amendment in UAPA, in terms of amendment in NIA, then giving more power to NIA to investigate not only terror activities but also any crime which has linkage with terrorism. So even if there is a remote linkage, now NIA can take up such cases if referred to. Then we are looking at the cryptocurrency, we are looking at organized crime syndicates, we are looking at narco-terror links, border smuggling, etc. And we must appreciate that as India stands, we have a difficult neighborhood of China, we have Pakistan, then we have porous borders along Bangladesh, along Myanmar. So this creates a difficult land border. Simultaneously, we are looking at the interplay of China with, let's say, Myanmar, with Bangladesh, with Pakistan. When we are looking at the marine areas, then the interplay of China with, let's say, Sri Lanka or let's say with Maldives. And the biggest friendship that is happening through the One Belt, One Road and China-Pakistan Economic Corridor between China and Pakistan. The champion and the player. So, These are the typical constituents. Now, what are the issues? So, issues will naturally come up if we are trying to solve. So, a lot of issues are simply law and order issues, and which is a state subject, and therefore there can be a federal issue. There can also be misuse of such acts to interfere in, let's say, opposition run states. That can also be a criticism. Then what about the idea of politicization of criminals? Have we seen in criminalization of politics day before yesterday that whenever any political party or political personnel, he starts protecting a group of criminals or individual criminals, to say so, then what happens? We have gone for criminalization of politics and politicization of criminals. So, if criminals are becoming politicians, or if politicians are supporting criminals, this is nothing but part of the organized crime. And if this goes scot-free, how can we expect that the other organized crimes will be suddenly solved? Then, what is the way forward? So, the Home Minister was talking about the high conviction rate of NIA, as high as 94%. So, he was talking that we should adopt the NIA model of high conviction rate and its decisiveness. And the states must come above party lines, and they must act very strongly to crush terrorism, which is in its final go in India. And any linkages with other internal security threats or other organized crime threats or any issues of law and order must also be dealt with iron hand if it has any linkages with the terror ecosystem. He also pointed out that terror incidents have decreased drastically, and we can use this data in our answers by plotting it like this. Right? So this is what we can use in any internal security answer. And this is regarding the terror incidents, and this is MHA data and given by the Home Minister himself. The fourth article pertains to the wildfire in Spain, and this pertains to GS1, GS3 again disaster management, environment ecology and geography. Now, wildfire is in Spain and it has reignited, and we must look at this map. And this is the European wildfire, and what do we see? That parts of North America, Spain, Italy, Portugal, essentially Western Europe and parts of the Mediterranean Europe, they are extremely affected by these wildfires. And how did it all start? So it started with heat waves. Continuous heat waves where heat was trapped with a high pressure. So air mass, which is hot air mass, if it is trapped with high pressure, so what happens? There is lack of circulation. If there is lack of circulation, then naturally there will be heat waves. So this continuous heat waves, it led to extreme amount of wildfires, not only in Spain but also in Italy. Now, how it all happens? So essentially global warming, climate change, more heat, high pressure systems, hot air masses, trapped together, continuous heat. So what will happen with this continuous heat? The soil will dry up. Soil will dry up. If the soil is dry, and the leaves, the litter, anything that has fallen, let's say the twigs, leaves, litter, anything that is there, that is also dry. Now all I need is a trigger. All I need is a trigger to start the fire, and once the fire has started, it can spread like a wildfire, and which is very difficult to isolate and to control. Why? Because we do not have any particular mechanism to tackle fire at that scale. we are talking about hundreds of acres in fire, under wildfire at the same amount of time. So you cannot control it, and you can just hope that what happens. So let's look what is the solution usually. So these wildfires will usually give us a lot of fumes, lot of particulate matter. This particulate matter will act like condensation nuclei. They will act like condensation nuclei, and all around the condensation nuclei we will have water particles condensing, and with this condensation what will happen? Eventually cloud formation and precipitation back, and with this precipitation this wildfire may be controlled, and usually this happens. So whenever there is a emission, heavy emission post a volcanic eruption, or there is a forest fire, so what will happen? Lot of emissions, and then finally these individual particles will act as condensation nuclei, which will trigger condensation, cloud formation, and finally precipitation. And this precipitation will only be able to control these wildfires. And if there is incessant heat waves and heat conditions under high pressure, then what will happen? Then this will continue to remain there. So the climatic reasons will be an unusually dry season, then more than usual temperature, which is ascribed to climate change, global warming, and drought-like conditions or dry conditions where crops, the standing crops, are become extremely dry. What is the fuel? It is plants, dead grass, and any material, any litter that is on the forest floor. Then it can be triggered by lightning, accident, recklessness, or if I want to, let's say, go for deforestation, I might burn the forest myself, and then it can become uncontrolled. Why would I do that? Because I want more timber. So again, a type of organized crime, timber mafias, right? Impacts, there will be extreme amount of pollution, then health hazards for the vulnerable. Then we are talking about wildlife losses. Why? Because eggs, young ones, will be directly roasted in these wildfires. Then it will naturally affect the economics. Why? It affects the life and livelihood of the entire region. India Inc. says that climate change is the single biggest risk, and this pertains to GS3 economics and GS3 disaster management. Now, why these Indian companies are saying so? What is the moot issue? So companies like Hindustan Unilever, Hyundai, Varun Beverages, they are all from different sectors. This is a beverage brand, this is a car manufacturer, this is a FMCG giant. They are all saying that the patterns of weather have become extremely unpredictable, and therefore we cannot clearly understand the business cycle. So business cycles, like, let's say there will be a slump post New Year. There will be a shopping spree from Christmas to, let's say, 31st. Then Dashera and Diwali. So these are cycles that we are following, and in these cycles the companies would give a certain target. But what if on top of all these factors a new factor comes in, that is climate change? And let's see how. So we are looking at extreme climate events. We are looking at unseasonable showers, right? So showers which can come just before our southwest monsoon. Then we are looking at heat waves. We just saw the European heat wave. Then we are looking at flooding. Flooding where we have looked at incessant rainfalls in Himachal Pradesh leading to flooding. We have recently looked into flash floods in Sikkim, which was triggered by cloudburst. Then we are looking at droughts. Droughts where we took up a case study of Bid also. So Maharashtra, Marathwada region is again staring at water scarcity, water stress and drought like conditions. Then we had 3 years of La Nina, that is called the triple dip La Nina in last 4 years, and this year we have El Nino. The monsoon is having multiple breaks, multiple bursts. So it will burst at different times, then it will take very long breaks, or it will become incessant in some areas. So the quantum of moisture or the quantum of total rain is not the issue. The biggest issue is the distribution. Then on top of it will be disruption in the supply chains. Why? Because global issue, local demand. Let's say there is some extreme weather event due to which there is crop failure. If there is crop failure, naturally what will happen? There will be scarcity of that crop. This will lead to inflation in the market and will import more. But what will happen to rural family? So rural incomes will decrease. If rural incomes will decrease, who will buy the sweets, the cars during the Diwali, Dussehra season? And how can we predict if the crops will be good or not? Even if there is good rainfall, but if a certain region is facing a localized hazard, can it affect the produce? And naturally, if the produce is affected, it can affect my inflation. If inflation is affected, it can change my repo rate. So again, the company will have to look at the new calculation. Let's say simultaneously there is any global issue which triggers rise in crude oil. So will my input cost also increase? Simultaneously, if there is a crop failure, then I will have to import more. And what will be the global price? If I am exporting more and there is more global demand, but there are chances of inflation, then there may be export restrictions. So many dynamic factors, so many variables were all balanced until climate change started creating newer problems for all these individual variables. So we are not able to understand what are the crop production patterns, rural incomes, inflationary shocks, and this gives us the fear of uncertainty, and which makes it difficult for expansion and more capital expenditure. And we are not able to understand the marriage season, Diwali, Dussehra season, and there is naturally uncertainty in consumer behavior also. Post-COVID also there is uncertainty, and due to these extreme climate events, this uncertainty is also being triggered. For example, Kerala was replaced as the top buyer of automobiles by Maharashtra. Why? Because Kerala is suffering from sulk from Gulf. So the Gulf money which was coming in form of remittances, that has decreased. Why? Because there are issues in the Gulf, because of which a lot of people have lost their jobs. Also, over the period of time, the prices of rubber has decreased. So overall, if such global and local factors are affecting the consumer choices, so it becomes very difficult for companies to predict the final consumer behavior. Thank you so much. I hope it helped.